When it comes to influential indie games, Five Nights at Freddy's is definitely one of the first examples to be brought up. Now, I shouldn't have to explain FNAF to you. After all, it's what kickstarted the whole mascot horror subgenre, and might have even led to indie horror games being as popular as they are now. Along with this, FNAF just in general is a big and long-lasting franchise. So long-lasting, in fact, that it could have been considered to have made some part in some people's childhoods. I mean, if you were a young child during the early years of FNAF, chances are that you were afraid of going out your room at night fearing Springtrap would try and kill you. FNAF seemingly made its popularity and influence overnight. But while some may say that the influential gamers or the theory viewers is the reason FNAF got popular, I think that it's the fandom that truly made it stick and keep the appeal of it. The songs to the animations to the animated songs, FNAF's fandom is very impressive for how little there was back then. And with FNAF growing, some of the content is downright earth-shattering. Still though, I feel like what makes the FNAF fandom one of the most impressive ones out there is in fact the fan-made series. Whether it be the short animations, song animations made into live actions, to musicals, or even animated series, the series the FNAF fandom have to offer are extremely impressive. Some of these series may be the reason people got even into FNAF in the first place, or may have played a bigger role in someone's childhood than the actual games. So, obviously, with all the praise I'm giving the series of the FNAF fandom, it's clear that I have watched and rewatched them many of times. And while many certainly do stand out, and some I might make a video on a later time, the one that grabs my attention the most is none other than the Interviewed series, created by Jay James and some other people. This series is what I feel like works the best with FNAF, and even allows itself to have deep moments and overall works in fantastic tandem with the FNAF franchise. But why is this series so impressive? Well, it might come from personal bias, but I hope that in this video, I can tell you and show you why, by going in episode created order to explain why this series is the best FNAF-centered series so far. But still, before we begin, I highly recommend watching this series before you continue this video, due to it not only being a great series, but much of this analysis will be hard to connect to without any background information. But with that out of the way, let's get on and start with the video.
Hmm? Oh, what's wrong? Oh, I get it. You're not used to being next to a creature as mythical and threatening as me, are you? Oh, you flatter me. But let's get on to this interview. For your sake, at least.
As you saw, I'm splitting up the analysis of this series into chapters rather than episode by episode. While these chapters aren't official by any means, it will help me organize my thoughts on the series. And so, we start the series and our first chapter off with the ever iconic An Interview with Springtrap. This episode is what started this entire thing, and thus it really holds up. We start off with the camera parked seemingly very close to the interrogator, allowing us to see both characters interacting while still allowing for a near POV angle. After a few seconds of anticipated silence, Springtrap breaks it by answering an unasked question. Now, here's something I feel like this chapter does really well, and that is the commentary each character has to offer. Each interviewed character and their interactions feel vastly different. In Springtrap's case, he seems to take a lot of joy and pride in talking about himself, constantly chuckling as he finds the situation near funny. Springtrap is obviously depicted as near insane, but what makes this even better than just chuckling and cackling is how unpredictable he gets with each cut. He introduces these brand new gimmicks just to drop them in the following cut, adding a certain level of unpredictability to his character. Now, is this just J Gems forgetting they introduced these gimmicks? Yeah, possibly. But I think them being intentional is more plausible. Afton is just finding ways to mix the situation up and make things more fun to himself. He likes being unpredictable and he's having fun with it. And if we believe him when he says that it hurts to talk, which makes sense, that just makes each of these gimmicks feel more impactful and better, as it means that he is putting all this pain on himself just for a quick laugh and for the fun of it. There's just one singular cut that doesn't follow this direct pattern, due to there being no cackling to follow it, and that is the part where he seemingly cries. Besides this cut from being an excellent subversion of expectations that makes us both curious and confused until the point where he lifts his head up, the lack of laughter is such a subtle detail to notify us that while he is still a psychopath, he still has regrets and genuinely feels miserable. And of course, who can forget that jump scare sequence?
You know, sometimes the suit still goes off by itself.
If you want a free token, give me a big ol' hug.
Speak of the devil.
I feel like this sequence simply speaks for itself, especially when accounting what I said earlier. But that is just the first episode of this chapter, let alone the series. And if you have seen said series, which why haven't you yet, you should know who is next, and that is Ennard. The video starts off with this honestly really creepy shot of Ennard descending down as he speaks to the interrogator. His lingering scratchy voice and the unnerving squeaks of his movement as we watch in fear as he goes down and arrives at the table. We then begin his dialogue, but instead of answering questions, his entire interview is him reflecting on what they are. They use metaphors, connections, symbolism, callbacks, simply to prove a point, which immediately gives them off and makes them a completely different character than the rest. Their raggedy metallic voice as they speak always manages to give me chills as they reflect on themselves. Ennard constantly shows their resentment through their dialogue, and the moments where it seems like they are going to snap makes us wonder when Ennard will eventually decide to engage in his hatred. And this is the appropriate time where I feel like I can commentate on the humans in this chapter. Each interview at some level seems to reflect the audience's feelings, but this episode does it perfectly. Through the entire interview, the interrogator constantly seems to show signs of fear as they lean back and move around in their chair through each time Ennard seems to slowly unhinge. It isn't just fear either. He constantly shows signs of sorrow whenever Ennard is venting or during his reflection. And none of this is even touching on how well and good the ending of this episode is. It is so surprising on how well done this subversion at the end is. Through this entire episode, we waited for Ennard to strike, which makes it so surprising when they simply don't. They are the only animatronic in this entire chapter that actively shows signs of wanting to kill the interrogator, but somehow they are also the most merciful out of the animatronics. The immense fear as the lights flicker out is such a wonderful jump scare, and one that isn't based solely on loud noises and a jump. It is the execution of letting our fears of the situation take hold, and that is something I can't get enough of. And with the end of that fantastic episode, we have now arrived at what I think to be the worst out of this chapter, and that is the interview with Lefty. I'm going to start off with saying the things that I don't blame them, and the faults that aren't really faults on their part, but they are faults nonetheless. For starters, the voice of Lefty that is used is exactly the same voice for the puppet in Ultimate Custom Night, which I'm guessing they couldn't find a voice actor for them, and that's fine. It just takes away from the uniqueness a bit that all the other interviews possess. Also, due to the limited amount of dialogue, there are some points where Lefty has to make random decisions to fit in with the dialogue, which I works. I won't say there is no connection to the dialogue and what will happen, but it still just feels very odd. However, I did feel like J-Gems did center around this content enough to make things feel believable, with Lefty pausing at certain points, and feeling very out of this world. And there are a lot of good aspects of this episode. Lefty's movements, some of the effects, and the entire ending shot and scene are spectacular, to say the least. But in all honesty, this episode doesn't really hold much besides that, and it's the worst out of these, and honestly a very meh episode. Nightmare's Bonnie's, on the other hand. Nightmare Bonnie's interview is, in my opinion, the strongest episode of this chapter, so let's immediately get in with it. We start off the episode with a POV shot of the interrogator. We walk by some cells in a very Silence of the Lamb type scene. In fact, a lot of this episode seems to draw a lot of inspiration from Silence of the Lambs, as you would see more of that later. The first room we are shown to walk past is Springtraps, a maniac that is relatively calm, but then again, we know what's about to happen. After that, we stop by another seemingly empty room, and we get a nice yet cheap jump scare of Toy Chica, who looks extremely insane due to the very erratic movements. We see that the further the rooms are, the more insane the people may be, thus making us dread for Nightmare Bonnie that we know is coming. But instead, we get the most tender character this far. He is well mannered and polite, yet we know that there is something up with him due to his appearance, the room progression I said earlier, and just genuine knowledge. He greets us and even invites us to join him at the table. However, we are very suspicious as this is very odd behavior for a nightmare. And as we move perspectives, we can see the interrogator is suspicious as well. Bonnie's voice and dialogue is honestly the greatest out of this chapter. He always talks politely and holds a lot of manners. However, he still does seem to enjoy murder, at least somewhat, allowing us to see him as still a threat. In fact, the beginning section isn't the only Silence of the Lamb comparison, which I have said before. It truly feels like there's a lot of inspiration with a polite killer that has a lot of terrible potential behind them. Terrible potential that could easily make them switch into a very, very psychotic being. And this is something I completely and utterly adore. We also continue to get more of Bonnie's polite attitude as he seems to be the most calm out of the animatronics we have reviewed. He recognizes that questions are reasonable, but just doesn't care about answering. Instead, he shows his resentment towards Afton and just refuses to answer himself. I feel like this is also a good point to mention some of the little knacks that I love throughout the episode. Starting off with the sound design. Now, all of the sounds in this series is wonderful, but I feel like here's where it first gets to shine. Every moment of Bonnie is followed by the noise of shifting gears, clicks, the little noises that are made with each movement, no matter how big or small that movement is. The little clicks his body manages to make to see the unnerving tone just so ever more. Another note that I would care to mention is the length of each cut. Rather than before, where we would mostly just get at most 3 sentences for a cut, Bonnie delivers entire one sided conversations. I feel like this is great at honing in how polite he is for being a killer robot. The only cut that isn't like this is, well, the jump scare scene, which follows a nice, self-aware, and admittedly funny line. Still, even after the slam and seeming the first instance where we get to see him snap, it just so happens to be another ploy of his, as he returns to his polite mannerisms after. Now, from the start, the interrogator held some power over the interrogation, to the fact that he is, well, the interrogator. But as time went on, we get to see that power slowly shift into Nightmare Bonnie's. That power wears off all the way till now, where now Bonnie is the interrogator, giving us a full transition of power. Along with this, Bonnie hints at a reason of why the animatronics are all here, or at least why they all are captured, which can be guessed based off context clues, and if you didn't figure it out already, he calls out Afton as his next question, allowing us to piece together that the mission at play is to get Afton. As we approach the end, we get a nice moment of Bonnie trying to manipulate the interviewer, a nice sudden change of pace that separates him from the rest of the ending scenes. And speaking of the ending scenes, this is just wonderful.
What do you think I'm gonna do? Now, if you'll excuse me, I think we're gonna have to bring this conference to an end. Oh, look at that.
And now, there is one last video I wish to include in this chapter, which is the interview with William Afton. However, this episode is the one that I have the least to talk about. However, it 100% isn't bad, especially given how it is supposed to be mostly lighthearted with just a cliffhanger at the end. The main problem I have with it is that it doesn't really introduce anything extremely new, but I still have to give a lot of props to the interview with Afton, which, well, should be in this episode. I love the videos of this scene and how unnerving the entire thing feels. It feels very well in establishing the new areas that the series is now taking, and I think it perfectly sends off this chapter in a conclusive way. So, with that being said, allow me to talk about our next chapter on the list.
Now, I know I'm an enigma to you. You're curious how my body functions, eh? That I have hands in my mouth without seemingly taking any space. How I'm sure you got tons of questions. But personal space. After all, this is your first time seeing me. And if you play your cards right, it might not be your last.
Now that we are in what I'm dubbing the runaway chapter, I feel like I have to explain a fact that you will probably pick up on the further we go down, and heavily in our final episode when we get to it. And that fact is that there will be less proportional analysis of the episodes, meaning I won't be reviewing all of the episode, far from it. While I will be talking a lot about the episodes, it will more be focused on analyzing specifics rather than each section of the episodes. This isn't because the sections are bad, quite the opposite in fact. Those kinds of scenes are why I think the series is the most impressive. No. Instead, it's because of how similar they are to a movie. I wouldn't be able to explain each story beat without me sounding like a movie reviewer. And besides, if I would do this, it would most likely be repetitive, as most would fall under the lines of blank is impressive because blank, with the second blank being made up of the same repetitive points. I do think the action, comedy, and such is nearly on point, in fact. I just don't have much to talk about it other than that. Now, with that being out of the way, let's continue. Our next chapter starts off with an interview with Bonnie again. We start off this episode with the aftermath of what happened in the interview with William Afton, with her Bonnie glitching out on the floor as we then retreat into a flashback. What is this flashback? Well, it's another interview, but this one's different. Our interrogator now has a voice, and they actually properly converse with Bonnie, seeming to be more cooperative and conversational, immediately sending in some individuality of this character from the rest of the interrogators, making us care about him more. As the conversation goes on, we pick up on a detail that is whenever Bonnie seems to get angry, he starts sparking. Why do I bring this up? Well, when Bonnie is told that Afton is in fact in the location with them, he starts to spark out uncontrollably as he stays silent, almost like he is about to snap at our interviewer. While doing this, our said interviewer picks up on the fact that the animatronics aren't here by accident, but rather are here on purpose and planning to get revenge on Afton as they have the chance. However, right after he narrates this discovery, we head into another flashback. Now, up to this point, I haven't touched on the music in this series so far, but I feel like now is a wonderful time to call attention to it. Each separate soundtrack manages to add so much to each individual scene it's added in, whether it be a terrifying drone of noise to follow a horrific sight, a catchy suspenseful tune for more action and mysterious events, or some light-hearted moments for some funny scenes, the music adds a lot. Is the music groundbreaking? No, I wouldn't go that far, but it truly adds so much to every single scene is added in, filling negative space whenever there isn't any other audio accompanying it, or simply adding more feeling with the dialogue. For example, take this scene here, which has no other audio or sound effects to speak of, simply allowing us to take in as much information as we can with each of these animatronics and their facial features. The music that accompanies this scene fills in so much of the negative space and allows for this section to be used to its best, with us figuring out what the scene is supposed to tell us for ourselves rather than being told through us by dialogue.
You want revenge?
We then cut back to Bonnie, who is now on fire, and he soon gets doused by who else but the interview from earlier. After a recap of events that we haven't seen yet, we get to experience our first team up of this series, with Bonnie and the Gems, the corporation behind all of this, as well as their boss Major. And this alliance soon enough gets put down. And now here comes a tiny little detail that I just love whenever I see it, and that is the animations for Ender whenever he's wearing someone. It isn't anything groundbreaking or exceptional, but I love how unnatural and unnerving it is. It allows us to know that Ennard is indeed in them, but it allows it to be as mysterious as it could be. Now, even though I won't be saying much about it, this is when we get our first action sequence of the series, and I wholeheartedly love it. And now, that concludes the episode. And while it may have seemed that I talked a lot about it for the time it gave us, that won't be the case for this next one. Again, not because it's bad, but because it's good. And this next episode is An Interview with Foxy. Now, for being called An Interview with Foxy, this is the only episode that doesn't even contain an interview. Yeah, and I also won't be saying much about this beginning part. It just simply doesn't stand out to me. However, the beginning still has one part that is worth a tangent.
How's that door coming? You know, Jeff, there's a reason they call me the Spring Lock. Jeff?
I simply love this scene. The music, the movement, everything. While this does start the incompetent soldier's plot armor that I don't really like, I can give it a pass just because it feels realistic in a way. Like how an actual human would feel if they were faced with one of these animatronics. It truly feels suspenseful and pumps me up full of adrenaline as it plays, with everything just coming into an execution and a gigantic, wonderful spectacle to look at. But still, other than that, this beginning scene is definitely my least favorite part of the episode, which definitely gives me some whiplash because the next scene is by far the best part of the episode. Now, I won't explain everything that happens in this scene, but this truly is the highlight of the episode. All of the animatronics are here to witness Afton's death. Some are here to restrain him, and they aren't cruel, but they simply want to witness the death of Afton and have their souls be freed together, which is an understandable reason for them to be grouped up like this. And this is where I would like to announce one of the greatest strengths I think the series has to offer. And I've kind of touched on it, but not in the same way. All of the animatronics in this episode feel like real people. They can be annoyed, polite, unsatisfied, remorseful, the list goes on. Rather than having the animatronics be seen as vengeful children, they just genuinely feel like people who were thrown into this situation. They aren't just the same vengeful spirits who are looking for death. Well, all of them do, except for one. The one and only true vengeful spirit.
You've caused all this pain and death for us. So, we thought we'd return the favor.
Stop. Death is too good for him. But death is exactly what he wants. Isn't it, Mr. Afton? This is not death, but it is exactly what you deserve.
Yep, we got Cassidy into the mix. And before I continue with this episode, may I just shed some light on how wonderful their voice is. Now, the voice acting for all these characters is great. They each have a fun, distinct voice and a way of speaking that certainly makes them feel distinct. The voice actors honestly did an incredible job with each of them. To the soft, quiet voice of Lefty, who, yes, has an actor now, to the wonderful, decrepit, yet very human voice of Springtrap. These voices are all wonderful, but none of them are as unique and true to character as Cassidy's. Cassidy's voice is by far the most robotic out of everyone in this scene, let alone the entire series. Instead of having a distinct accent or dialect, Cassidy uses the most straightforward manner of speaking. They are narrow and almost feel like they are speaking word for word rather than by sentence. However, while they have the most direct way of speaking, they also carry the most respect while doing so. Almost as if they're trying to be professional with their manners, and somehow even despite this, they still have a level of sass and anger that comes through with each word they speak. Almost as they hold extreme animosity to whoever they are speaking to. And to top this off, with the distortion and the other effects, you get a borderline phenomenal voice for a phenomenal character. Also, not to mention how they do change their voice at certain times, allowing us to pick up more of Cassidy's emotions that still maintain their shtick, but also don't feel lazy in any way, shape, or form. The entire series itself doesn't even forbid Cassidy from breaking the mold.
Like I said, death is too good for him.
What about us?
That is not relevant.
While I don't want to get into plot points of the series a lot, I do want to say how the division between the animatronics is really well done, with a group that wants to kill Afton to free their souls, and maybe some other reasons accompanying it, and the other side with a group that wants to torture Afton to make him pay for his wrongdoings. No other FNAF media, at least to my knowledge, has done this, and if they have, it hasn't been handled quite as well as this episode. The emotions of the characters truly come through with their voice and animation, making everything feel believable and making you understand why each side wants what they want. And if you didn't think this was the best part of the episode, somehow, then this one interaction should have convinced you.
Oh, so you're helping him now?
Not helping him. Just keeping him alive.
Is all this really worth it? I understand your anger, but...
If you did, you wouldn't be killing him so soon.
Yeah, remember what I said about breaking the mold? How two different voices can both fit a character yet be so drastically different is honestly beyond me. But it still gives us a phenomenal execution, and one that I can't get enough of. Now, we sadly have to finish this wonderful section, but don't worry, these following scenes aren't bad, they just aren't the section before. The gems now storm the warehouse to raid the animatronics and to retrieve Afton again. And if you thought that just because we exited the section, we were done from phenomenal scenes, you are severely mistaken. Starting off, I feel like now is a good chance for me to describe how much this series truly feels like a FNAF series. It already has used the FNAF sound effects plenty of times, but now they are even more present. Sure, some other reasons do make this feel very true to the FNAF feeling, but the way the sound effects are used just pushes that feeling even more. And besides, it's not like it's all FNAF. There are still many sound effects that are custom made or possibly taken from other properties. But this still just makes the occasional FNAF sound effect work even better, as it doesn't feel like it's trying to hitchhike off of FNAF. Now, secondly, when the series got more dramatic, it did sadly lose more of its horror tone, but luckily it still has some unnerving and scary scenes, such as this one.
Come on for this. You seeing this, Emma? Emma?
I don't know how to explain it, but this scene is just perfect. The creepy carousel ride making our skin crawl as we then fear for the lives of the soldiers. And even though we shouldn't fear for the lives of the soldiers given the fact that they are antagonists, it still does make a very dramatic moment. It even has some nice little details of the animatronics being in the shadows as well as the mangled corpse of Emerald. The scene even has little comedic bits that long just enough to catch us off guard, before we get right back into being afraid. And yeah, this scene does start the trend where the soldiers seem like idiots, but honestly, I don't mind it as I probably should. As long as the execution of it's good, and damn if it isn't that, I don't know what is. And I'm not interested in repeatedly bringing up comedic moments, but without their deaths, we wouldn't get this joke that keeps cracking me up.
You. Our man's supposed to be.
Oh, yes, well, I believe Chica and the others were taking care of that.
I think we killed them.
Huh. You don't say.
And with that, we reach our end of the second to last episode of the series, and the final one of this section. And we can finally move on to the final one, which is, long. How long? Well, it's about 30 minutes long, so no biggie.
How many people have I killed? Can't remember. But hey, unrelated question. How many people have went missing around here in, I don't know, the last two years? I'm sure you got the records to tell me. Or maybe your co-workers does.
Yeah, this is the only section that will be made up of one singular episode. And that's because, as I've said before, this episode is 30 minutes long. The last section was 20 minutes. However, despite me hyping this up, this is the episode that will show the most section focus analysis. A lot of this episode is just people saying and doing things related to the plot. Still though, this one episode brought so many unique areas that I think it will balance out. Now, let's cut to the chase and talk about the Cassidy interview. We start off with a brief description of what happened on Cassidy's side of things, which only goes well when it's transitioned to present day. You may be tempted to see this as just boring filler, but in truth, it's pretty short, and the interview with Foxy was debuted in September 11th, 2001, and this premiered at December 22, 2022. So yeah, I feel like it's just a tad bit justified. Anyways, after this, we get to take part in watching the opening scene of this masterpiece, the early small speech Cassidy gives to Afton.
April 7th, 1984. Does that date sound familiar to you, Mr. Afton?
What the hell is this?
This date was very important to me. I'm not surprised you don't remember. Why would you?
Where am I?
But this date does invoke something inside of you. Yes.
This scene is downright beautiful, and I could bring up so many points regarding it, but for now, I instead want to point on some specific details that the scene does. For starters, the way this talk is presented is exceptional in so many ways. The first words we are ever told in this episode is in fact a date, which we later are told that has something to do with Afton. These being the first few words presents a lingering mystery that we question ourselves throughout the majority of the episode. Not only this, but the simple detail of Cassidy remembering the exact day it was feels extremely in character for her, and increases our questioning. It's not 1984 that could have hosted many different events, but it was April 7th, 1984, which is just so much more impactful. And this is just from a few sentences, nonetheless. Not only this, but the way Afton abruptly asks where he is for Cassidy to just simply ignore him feels also incredibly in character and holds so much weight in its execution. Not to mention Cassidy's speech itself feels incredibly in character as well as it feels so incredibly linear but also philosophical in a way. The only thing that makes this speech even better are Cassidy's voice and the visuals throughout the entire thing. Cassidy's voice is everything I praised in the last video and more. The bosses of it feel very unnatural but still very distinct and well made. This is with the added glitching at times makes Cassidy feel way more unstable, but due to how little it happens, it doesn't get to the point where it feels annoying. It's here to purely emphasize certain parts, and I love it for that. And the visuals are to die for. The two spotlights allowing us to see our only two characters. This complemented with the dark background gave us many amazing shots and even a nice reference to FNAF 3. Also, not to mention that this has a line that I swear should be considering a drug, cause damn I am near addicted to it in the following visuals.
It is eating at you. It has been since then. You cannot escape it. You cannot run from it, despite what you tell yourself.
What do you want from me?
You are hurting, Mr. Afton. You're an open wound. And I am here to make you bleed.
These wonderful line deliveries are some that you can't even see from actual movies, and the visuals at the end both complementing the situation perfectly. It also makes us realize how Cassidy is much more supernatural than the rest. Oh yeah, and this is just the first 2 minutes. We still got so much more to go. We exit this wonderful, amazing scene, and in this place, we get a new flashback that, while not as good as the previous scene before, it's far from mediocre. It starts with nothing mind-blowing, but it's great with the little nursery rhyme making things feel very unsettling. This with the contrast of William's later big angry loud personality, and you got a great contrast that actually scared me a few times while watching it. And then we got the scene that everybody here should be taking notes on if they are looking to have anything in sort of relation to William Afton.
If only you had listened to what I said. And if only you hadn't been such a mindless, stupid fucking idiot, none of this would have happened! Why did you do it? Why didn't you just listen to me? Why didn't anybody listen to me?
This is how you give proper character development to William Afton. He's not a mindless psychopath. He isn't severely depressed. No. Instead, this series has given a groveling man who is angry and hates the choices he has made, but is going through a common thing, which is just blaming other people. But is still very common that we can't really hate him for it. But still, he generally has care for others and likely still does, just hidden under all of his insanity. And this series does all of that perfect character development to a T. And what better to come along with this amazing character description? Well, this shot where he tries to pull his jaw off. And this shot is nothing but absolutely wonderful. And the best thing is that this actually makes you feel proper emotions. You don't forgive William Afton, but you can understand what he did. This is extremely due to the voice acting, which even now excels and slightly even changes to fit a dead corpse, or something resembling human for certain scenes, which just makes it all the more fitting. And again, this episode doesn't make William Afton seem perfect. He is still very terrifying and murderous, which the following scenes do a great job at showing. And this scene is just beautiful. It characterizes William Afton as a serial killer, beautifully, and not in the way where you think the agents are morons, but instead that Afton is a skilled murderer and knows what he's doing. Also, I feel like this goes without explanation, but this shot goes extremely hard. Now, I know I might sound like a broken record by saying everything is great every single scene. Well, good news, some of the following scenes are alright. They're not bad, just alright. They're not good but as amazing as the others. They do their job and allow for the more feeling to be put into the characters. But they don't strike me as anything entirely special. But hey, at least J-Gems found a way to simulate flashing lights without being an eye strain or epilepsy warning. And are you ready? Because we are about to enter God tier territory, because we are back with the return of Cassidy. We start off with this newly wonderful scene by us being bashed over the head with an audible cue of voices, with only some certain words being able to be made out, until we reach back to the date we heard at the beginning of the episode, April 7th, 1984. Now, this might seem like a lot of randomness, but what I really love is how this jumble of words is made up of dates. Dates of William Afton's past victims. This is honestly a great detail, and I love it so much, like how Cassidy has been stalking and keeping tabs on the dates, or that they are just a manifestation of the pain Afton brings. Due to each of these holding the same amount of detail as the date Cassidy said at the beginning, which just so happens to be their death date, and you get a scene that feels extremely impactful in every way. But another thing I love about this scene is how closely it resembles Cassidy's overall goal, and that is to torture William Afton through emotional and psychological damage. And if a bunch of scrambled, yelling, loud words don't make you lose some of your sanity, then I don't know what will. And now I get to bring up more of the stellar visuals that are present throughout this entire scene, and the scene before it, but with some extra aspects. Starting off with the most unexpected, the texture. The texture of Cassidy in every shot is completely god tier, when paired with the lighting, of course. Each separate line of difference makes Cassidy look that much more threatening with every second. This makes Cassidy's design also look more distinguishable, as you can make out every detail in their brightly yellow suit, which just adds to the menacing presence they hold. A menacing presence that is only helped with the shadows that accompany her. I know I already touched on this type of lighting before, but there are so many more aspects I wish to point out that are more distinguishable in these frames. The shadows, for example, add so much to each part of Cassidy, being essentially pitch black in most cases. This pitch black look the shadows have make some parts of Cassidy near invisible, which only makes their bright yellow face come out in more contrast with the dark shadows. In comparison, the eyebrows make whatever shadow they have extremely dark and basically pitch black, and with them complementing the eyes, and the eyes look so much more big and hollow because of this. Along with these larger dark splotches, the eye animation is also absolutely wonderful. It follows the rest of Cassidy's shtick with her animation, where it's very jittery and stop motion like, but has a lot more frames in its animation, allowing for more expressions to be made without seeming like an unnecessary contrast. And what I also love with Cassidy is how it's also shown to be in control without even lifting anything. The shots where William and Cassidy are both in frame picture Cassidy as a much more imposing figure, even with her static stature. I also adore how much less human Cassidy is to William Afton. Whenever William speaks, it's without any intense echo. It feels human and understandable, while Cassidy seems to be entirely separate from emotion, and instead has their voice ring out in terror and echo, making their voice feel so much more powerful, without using any extreme measures. And despite all of this robotic talk, Cassidy still has a personality to speak of, and that can be shown and echoed without any big changes, but instead subtle ones. They seem very self-centered in their approach, with them saying words that feel very misplaced, but in a way that doesn't take away from the experience, but instead makes them feel almost petty, but in a very organized way. They have always disregarded the emotions of others for their own self-gain and fulfillment, but this scene just allows us to see that, but in a more clear-cut way. The way they show off their anger and resentment through just simple whispers truly drive home this detail, and I adore it. And then, Cassidy gives us what we all needed in this episode. Psychological warfare! Yippee! There is so much greatness to this next scene, and it makes me sad that I don't have the words to properly do it justice. So, I won't. I will let it speak for itself.
You don't know suffering.
You don't think I know suffering? I was locked in the same room for 30 goddamn years!
That is not what I am referring to. You think you can somehow run from your past by choosing to ignore it. You've had quite the life, Mr. Afton. Let's recap, shall we? You were also responsible for the death of your wife.
I had good reason for it.
Yes, the reason. Elizabeth.
Don't you dare say that name.
You were responsible for her death too. Killed by the hand, or perhaps claw, of your own machine.
What are you doing?
I'm merely reminding you of your sins. In case you forgot.
Stop this.
Your son, Evan. Killed by yet another one of your creations.
Stop it.
There are so many details and ways that the skill tripping scene has that just make it so unfathomably good. The way Cassidy seems to make fun of Elizabeth's death, to how they have trouble saying Evan, it all just feels right and connected. The scene is just great through and through, and I love every second of it. It's a true shame that we have to cut this scene in exchange for some others. However, these scenes and sections most certainly have the most replay value out of this episode. There was only one thing that could make these better, but I don't really know what.
Come on guys, I'm not in the mood. Alright, if you insist.
Okay, scratch that. That perfects it. Now, while I am not pointing it out, these scenes in the forest are generally great at showing off individual personalities, and further shows the divide between the animatronics. Two things I really do adore about the series, and adore about them especially. They show off the individuality of each animatronic, and I could honestly spend minutes with saying how mostly each separate animatronic are near perfected. Now, here's one thing I did notice with this episode as I was reviewing it, and that is this scene in between Cassidy and Afton and the other side quests just feel too clustered. Sure, on a casual watch it is extremely hard to notice, and I don't really find a problem with it, but yeah, it's an issue nonetheless. And the reason I bring this up is because we have another Cassidy moment, baby. Now, with these therapy sessions, the last few ones typically each had a unique feeling that carried them. The first one felt like the beginning and prologue, with the next feeling in the middle. However, this one feels like both the end and the start, as it both concludes the pressure that has happened up to this point, and its effect on Springtrap, as well as it feels the beginning of his hell. This is mostly due to all the openness William has expressed during the therapy sessions, truly humanizing his character in a really good way. While this scene does conclude a lot with Springtrap and truly conclude his character, it still does improve and add on to Cassidy's ideals and general concept. Cassidy now feels way more neutral and indifferent, almost as they have finally derived pleasure from it. However, it still does hammer in how Cassidy is willing to go to extreme lengths just to torture Afton a little bit more. And a lot of this feeling is truly evident from what I think is the most terribly underrated line in this series.
And over again. You should note that this is simply a taste of your future experiences. It is my responsibility to ensure that the feelings you experience now shall prevail for the next many millennia. Or at least, until our star burns out. We shall see what happens then.
But back to Springtrap, which feels genuinely and greatly well-rounded, and even entertains us with a nice callback to the very first episode of the series. This scene, for also being terribly underrated, truly hammers in the many aspects of these characters, which culminates in this wonderful scene.
Interesting. I was under the impression you had lost anything remotely resembling empathy or remorse. But for a moment, I saw sorrow. Fleeting, but noticeable.
I'm going to kill you, like I killed the rest of them.
That would be entertaining, I suppose. And fortunately for you, you have all the time in the world to plan this theoretical action. But I believe it is safe to assume that no force on this earth can match the power I
hold. Hello again, Afton. We have unfinished business we need to discuss. Please, come with me.
Like, do I honestly need to say more? The expressions, sound design, voice acting, music, it's all just feels perfect. Now, just because we are done with the Cassidy interview, doesn't mean there aren't any great scenes left. Sure, a lot of them are just talking and moving the plot forward, but they do it well. And everything is just great, especially the dialogue and plot. But still, it's nothing much else to analyze other than that. Also, we get some really cool dynamics with the cliffhanger with Cassidy, the partnership between Ennard and Bonnie. Okay, speaking of Ennard, I love their voice, and I love their entirely character as a whole. It truly feels good to the character, and while it's not philosophy Ennard from his debut, this is honestly way better in my opinion. If you're upset I'm not going over the plots, well, just watch the series. Why haven't you yet? It honestly really deserves a binge. Still though, these next scenes are great and honestly really make me can't wait for the next installment of the series. Especially well, I will just play the clip for you. If that isn't enough for you to want more, then I'm pretty sure you have no taste, or soul for that matter.
Oh? You want to know my name now? Honestly, I'm kinda disappointed it took you this long to ask that at least. I thought that was one of the first questions human asks when meeting someone new. Guess you're not sociable. Enough, huh? I get it. You're grateful. Don't forget it, alright? Or at least try to survive long enough to tell someone else.
The Interviewed series, created by J Gems, is a phenomenal masterpiece, especially when considering the FNAF fandom. It truly feels like it's connected with the FNAF games, and also with its sound effects, characters, and everything that should be with its relation. But the Interview series doesn't go fully into FNAF to make it feel like it's copying it, and also doesn't let the FNAF lore take it over. Not only this, but the genuine quality of the series from start to finish is nothing short of astonishing, and it makes me sad and heartbroken that it is terribly underrated for what it truly does. The voice acting, designs, lighting, plot, comedy, action, and everything. It has so much to offer for just being a FNAF fan indie project on YouTube. So much of this series was on point, and while I didn't go over some scenes as in depth as others, that is still far from me saying it was bad. Of course, there are some wacky issues and mishaps, but that is the thing. That's with every show in existence. There are so few series that can match to something of this altitude in the FNAF fandom, and that is very inspiring to me. I really do suggest watching it if you haven't already. This episode was just an analysis and not a beat by beat story time, and even if it was a fantastic analysis, I wouldn't be able to do this in series entirely justice. And along with that, there were even some episodes that I left out, episodes that are still absolutely wonderful. In fact, While you're at it, look at J-Gems' other works. They put out some amazing content. Well, that's it for now. I hope you really enjoyed this. And please support J-Gems, and if you have any other FNAF series that you think comes close to this series, then please comment them down below. I would love to check them out.
Hey, you wanna know a little secret of mine? Yeah. Restraints, hindrances meant to stop me, to slow me down and make me unable to break out of this, they aren't strong enough. Look at that face. Listening that I could have broken out a while ago. Broken out a long time ago, in fact. But instead, had this little chat with you instead. Well, I will tell you then. It's to let your family see your last moments. How about you go smile for the camera? Give them one final goodbye.